Joining us now to talk more about this is economic futurist and former economic advisor to Donald Trump, Andrew Busch. Andrew, I can't believe the timing of this conversation here. Really appreciate you joining us this morning. We've just heard from these ministers of the Canadian government talking about the lengths Canada is going to what it sounds like to really effectively try to appease Trump and his administration. Are these efforts resonating across the border with Trump, with Team Trump? Do you know, Andrew?
Well, I think the key is that Canada's been very aggressive in going down to Mar-a-Lago, meeting with President Trump and the advisors, and trying to get ahead of what's been announced, obviously, for some time through the campaign about these tariffs that are coming. Canada got picked on a lot the last time Trump was in office, and they redid NAFTA into USMCA, or USMCA as they call it. And that led to, basically 99% of trade between the United States and Canada is tariff-free. So I think it's wise for the Canadians to move forward. I know Hillman's been down there. I know there's been a lot of commentary coming out about this, but this is really key, is to be smart about it, meet with the officials, work quickly, and try not to out-aggrandize Trump on this issue. And I think that's really key.
Okay, so it sounds like you kind of like the Canadian strategy at this point here. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, and you know Donald Trump, what his strategy is regarding Canada, because none of this sort of financial or, fiscal annexation of the country came up during the election campaign here. What is it with Trump's sort of seeming obsession or interest in Canada now?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's more the opening negotiating stance, right? That's what we're talking about here. And I think the way that the Trump administration will look at this is that any country that runs a trade surplus with the United States should be targeted some way, somehow, to alleviate that trade surplus or pay recompense for it somehow. That's not the way most economics works, and tariffs generally are really bad, but that's the way that this administration's approaching it. And they're really just trying to get better deals from every country on trade, on doing business together. So I think that's the way the Canadians need to understand this. And Canadians do. I mean, like I said, the strategy has been very good from what I've seen already. But I also think there's some problems. I mean, Canada's got a leadership problem, as you know, right now. And so I'm not sure who's really at the till, right? Who is really keeping the boat in the direction that it needs to be going? Will you have a new government within 3 months? Will you have a conservative government? How does that government interact with the Trump administration? Do the different provinces have different approaches to the trade situation? I know Alberta, as an example, is not happy with the thought of reducing down energy exports to the United States, as an example there. So there's a lot going on here that could disrupt this and cause problems overall. So there's a lot of moving parts.
There certainly are. And you touched on the tariffs there, saying, a lot of people suggest that's kind of bad economic policy, generally speaking. But Trump seems really to be a big fan of them. As a former economic advisor to him, does he grasp the point that, if he puts tariffs here, then there'll be tariffs in the U.S. and Americans will pay? I mean, a lot of people seem confused about his belief or understanding of what tariffs may do to both economies, quite frankly.
No, I think he has an understanding of it, but he views it as a method of extracting what he wants, better deals. I think that would be his term on the trade relations and business relations between countries. And really, I think a strategy for Canada that they really need to employ a lot more is that it's us against China, meaning Canada, U.S., and Mexico against China. I mean, China is not shall we say, followed the strictures of the WTO. They've bent the rules dramatically. They are running $1 trillion surplus a year, a trade surplus. So I think that's a really good place to find common ground for Canada and the United States to look forward to figuring out how they can deal with the China problem. But yes, they're aware, they understand this, but they just have a philosophy on how this should work that's different from most economic principles.
Yeah, but we also heard Premier Doug Ford, for example, here in Ontario, Andrew, has mentioned the idea of China sort of dumping goods through Mexico, and that is kind of posing a big problem. That sounds along the lines of what you're indicating here. What about this sort of scattershot approach from the from Canada right now. You know, we have these premiers visiting or trying to, you know, go on Fox News, CNN, et cetera. No sort of cohesive leadership. There is a meeting happening in Ottawa today. What level of importance do you put on this meeting between, you know, the federal and provincial ministers here or leaders to try to sort of come up with a sort of Team Canada focused approach?
I think it's super important to stay unified and not to allow to be picked off from different trade standpoints. I already mentioned what Alberta thinks, and I think rightly so. So you really do want to be unified, and you want to be careful with that. And I just want to address something else too. You know, the incoming President Trump said that, you know, Canada could be a 51st state, kind of jokingly, but honestly, and I know most Canadians would think this is an anathema, but hear me out on this a little bit. That doesn't mean to say that different provinces might feel differently about this. And while that may seem like crazy, I would just remind everyone that there was a vote back in 1998, right, for Quebec. So this is not something out of the realm. And in the United States, by the way, we have some interesting things going on with secession as well, believe it or not. I mean, Texas has always wanted to leave the United States. But also, just as an example, this is not crazy. There are counties in Illinois that want to become part of Indiana. Why do they like that? Because Indiana is a much better run state than Illinois and doesn't have the same pension and benefit problems that Illinois does. So when you start to think along the lines of what would this mean for Canada, well, what if Trump starts to really appeal to the different provinces on what they want and makes a case for that? Then it becomes very disruptive for Canadian politics, and it makes it really hard for Canada to stay unified in its approach.
Recent polls that would suggest about 90% of Canadians are against the idea, so we'll have to see whether Trump can sort of be more tantalizing about that. Not sure there is an appetite, nevertheless. Andrew Busch, appreciate the time this morning. Thanks for this conversation.
You bet.
Okay, take care. Quick break here on Breakfast. We are back with your headlines right after this.